Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,400 comedians for the last 50 years. My guest today is the wonderful Mr. Alistair Barrie. Yay!
Hello. Hello, Richard. Thank you very much for that rousing ovation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being my guest.
That's quite all right. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. As you were telling me beforehand, I'm number 143, so I'm feeling just missed a podium finish, but close enough.
Well, that's a magic number, my friend. So we're going to talk for a while about your comedy career, and
Yes.
I'd like to go right back to the start and ask you, how did you become a comedian in the first place, please?
I, like quite a lot of comics, was a frustrated actor, and I'd done drama school. It had gone okay, came out, didn't get an agent, nearly did, then didn't, and nearly did, then didn't, and I sort of did bits and bobs, like directing stuff on the fringe, like fringe theatre and stuff like that. A couple of acting jobs, but nothing anywhere near making a living. The odd student film, the odd thing here or there, and I, like quite a lot of my friends from drama school, kind of fairly rapidly went off on other directions, whereas I knew that that's performing was what I was wanting to do. And I think the main catalyst was the fact that a friend of mine who was at drama school with me got a job in a for want of a better word, a telesales firm, but it was quite high-end telesales. You were selling quite expensive advertising space, so you could make quite a lot of money. And she was there making quite a lot of money because she was very good at it. She got me along, and then it was in Old Street. It was very near the Comedy Caf,
Yeah.
and I always loved comedy. I'd never really been to never really dipped my toe in the comedy circuit that much. I've been to the Meccano up in Islington. I've been to a couple of things,
Yeah.
but I still remember I managed a pub for a while, and it was one thing comedians know: when you walk into a room, if it's a corner bar and there's a corner, don't put comedy on there. At the time, I had no idea, and so I don't know who it was. Some poor sod got booked, and I was kind of like asking him about it, going, and he went, "Oh, well, it's been all right. I've only been going about a year. I've only really ever died on my ass once in a room quite a lot like this, actually," and then proceeded to die on his ass. So I didn't know a lot about comedy, but I started going to the Comedy Caf, and I think I've said this elsewhere, but the person who is most primarily responsible for my comedy career is Trevor Locke, because
Superb.
wonderful, wonderful comedian, and also fairly fearless and experimental.
Yeah, yeah.
When I say that as a compliment, I mean it as a compliment. If I was to say it as a negative, he in the late 90s at the Comedy Caf would do. I mean, he did one routine. He always did in a gold lycra bodysuit, and he did. I saw him loads of times, and I remember one particular night he came off stage, and Nick Wilty, who was comparing, went, "Well, he's got something. It's not jokes, but he's got something." And I saw one show, and I genuinely went, I'm sure I could do that better than that. And because I'd done quite a lot of public speaking, I was an actor. I'd done debating at school. I went on a exchange to the States when I was in high school, and I did a sort of speech at the end. And I always remember the English teacher came up to me afterwards and went, "You could have charged for that." And about 10 years later, I went, "Oh, that's an idea." And so yeah, I went booked a gig at the Comedy Caf. My first ever gig was May 1998,
Wow.
and yeah, it went all right. I'd written far too much material, most of which was shit. And but it was kind of like, yeah, I got the bug almost immediately,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I spent a lot of us from my generation spent a lot of time at the Comedy Caf back in the day, and yeah, pretty much straight away started booking other gigs, and I was very lucky. It worked out quite quickly, and I went pro after a couple of years, and
Nice.
here we are, a mere 24 years later. About three rungs higher up the ladder. So
Well, good for you. I'm so pleased you're doing what you do. I had to go once, you know. I
did
had to
you?
go once at stand-up comedy
Where did you do it?
years and years ago. When I first went to Edinburgh, I knew one of the promoters, and he said we've got a gong show for old people on a on Monday rainy afternoon, and I went, oh, they'll think I'm good in funny in pubs and everything. I can remember all the jokes the comedians say. So I wrote this script and I walked out. There's three people in the crowd, and I said to them, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, but I can't see the resemblance myself." And I thought that was a brilliant opening line because I was his double when I was at college. One old fella at the back just went, "Fuck off and cut me off."
That's
That was it.
I have to say, as you said that, I went fair play, because that's slightly unfair from the old bloke. But then I was very lucky. I've never done a gong show.
Wow.
I've emceed them at the Comedy Store.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, they're not really comedy. They're a kind of
No,
combative
they're more of
experience.
a test.
But it's also the fact that someone can go fuck off, and you go, well, that's not really fair, is it? And it's quite funny. I mean, there's a very good story Mick Ferry tells when he was emceeing the gong at the store. Some bloke was, because they announce it from the sound booth, and they walk up to the stage, and some bloke was on crutches, and he took an absolute age. I mean, literally, because once you give the applause and the applause dies down, they're still not there. You're like, come on, keep it going, keep it. But it took so long that by the time the bloke eventually got on the stage, it had been like 2 minutes since he was introduced. He got to the microphone and went, and Mick gonged him, which I'm sorry is funny.
Oh.
That's funny. Because that's what the night's about. It's about being funny. Yeah. And then he got people going, can't believe you did that. And he was disabled. Oh, da, da, da. So, no, that is a funny thing to do.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
But the thing is as well, that what you did was also the most classic open mic thing imaginable, which is the lookalike joke.
Yeah.
And we all have a lookalike joke. And when you start... I mean, who is that? Someone who used to get up and go, oh, I know what you're thinking. Daniel Bedingfield's let himself go. And you're going to go. There's one act in particular who I won't mention by name because I think he still uses it, who uses a character from EastEnders who left EastEnders before I started comedy. And you're just like, mate. And it's one of those things. It's like a little crutch. And I mean, Comedy Caf is an interesting one. I remember the first time I won the Comedy Caf New Act competition, which was a real rite of passage on a Wednesday back in the day. I was my telesales job, and I went down there, as I often did. It's free entry. And, I'd done a few gigs by this point, and I was wearing a suit from work. And I got there, and they went, oh, someone hasn't turned up. Do you want to go on? And I went, oh, all right. Because I had my 5 minutes by it. And so I got up and I kind of went, oh God, sorry about the suit. I've just come from work. And as I'm sure you know, it is vital to wear a suit when you work in telesales. And it's got this massive laugh. And I went, yeah, no, it's because you phone people up and you go, would you like to buy some advertising space? And they say, tell me what you're wearing. And as a result, that was the first gig I ever really knocked out of the park, because something about how I presented myself in the first few seconds meant everyone thought I was funny. And so even stuff that wasn't that good was going to go well, because it's the whole thing. If they like you, they will laugh. If someone doesn't like you, it doesn't matter how good the comedy is, they're not going to laugh. And the funny thing about that is I won. I happen to know that there was a certain Michael McIntyre in the audience that night, because I had a conversation with him many years later, because he said, I knew we started at the same time because I saw you win the Comedy Caf New Act competition, and I thought, well, if that's the competition. So thanks, Michael. That's a classic bit of Michael McIntyre social interaction there.
That's
oh, it's Michael. Michael's always looking for a laugh. So
yeah.
But yeah, it's but the lookalike thing.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is you can quite often now these days tell a good new comic by the spin. You've got to put a spin on it, because you've done one gig. So to get up and go, I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards. Fair enough, but there's no spin there.
No.
And maybe you had a brilliant second line about, I'll do a bad jump off the stage, but you didn't have time because the bloke told you to fuck off.
Damn, that's what I was missing. Well, certainly as a result of it, I thought, well, my calling lies in the audience as opposed to being on the stage. Never say never again. But it's interesting what you say, because with me, I always used to sit right at the back, and I thought the laugh would carry. And certainly over the last 4 or 5 years or so, or longer, I've gone more to the front row, and it's given me a hell of amount of confidence, and I'm part of the acts now. They all know who I am. It's lovely, you know. And the big thing about the success of the blog and everything is now wherever I go, I get recognised, which is wonderful, which is just the best thing.
It's quite funny that there is. I think there's an interesting thing with that because people sitting near the front is like if anyone turns up at a gig and goes, "I want to sit near the front," because most people turn up and go, "I don't want to go anywhere near the front."
Yeah.
And you want to tell them that generally speaking, actually the front is fine because as long as you're not a dick, it's actually that's great. But anyone who comes into the room and goes, "I want to sit at the front," you go, "Oh, you're already a dick." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
a
yeah.
punter. Yeah, because they're going to give me stuff and I'll go, you know, and you go, oh,
You
no.
don't say I'm sitting at the front. You just
But it's, I mean,
mention,
because what comics don't like, generally speaking, is people they know sat at the front.
yeah,
But, I mean, and you get that. And funnily enough, and sometimes you don't get a chance. Like the tour I've just finished, we recorded my special at the store, and quite a good mate of mine got stuck on the front row right there. Now I'm old enough and experienced enough, and the show was, written. There wasn't really crowd work in it. But if it's a club night, it would have been a bit weird. Funny thing is, he's basically in my special almost as much as I am, sat in the front row. I texted him, went, "You're not laughing enough." But I think the thing is because like if you go to Always Be Comedy and you're sat in the front row, it's kind of part of the thing, and also, people know you love comedy because over the years there was one guy when I started who used to he was just very odd, and he was always at the open mic nights. And he probably still is. I don't know. Maybe I got off the open mic circuit and he didn't. But he'd record it, but he would also sort of remember things that you mentioned, and then two
wow,
years later he'd be like, "Yes, because I remember you saying that you went to an all boys school to the age of 10 on the Isle of Wight." Jeez, I must have mentioned that on stage
that's
once.
creepy.
But yeah, but no, I think comics it's like someone like you. Not only do you love comedy, but you sort of put your money where your mouth is with the blog and everything else. So it's nice.
It's great. I mean, it's such a wonderful thing because what's not to love? It's just joyous doing it. Tell me about your writing process for a routine or show. How do you go about writing a show? Do you have ideas, pointers? How do you do it?
That's probably the $1 million question. And if I was going to be asking any of my colleagues, any of the more famous people, how do you? It's something I'd really like to know the answer to. Someone like Sarah Millican, who
Yeah,
I mean, Sarah's a fucking machine. I'm like,
yeah,
and I mean, Gary, her husband is as
yeah,
well, but Gary is a joke writer, so he goes and sits and crafts these jokes, which I can't do. I've written the odd joke. I gave one to Tim Vine once that he thought was all right. It was I was so I went to the desert. It was no, I went to the desert. It was covered in sand. No, hang on. It was covered in sand and squid rings. Yeah, it was the calamari desert. Yeah, I'm like that. I told Tim and he went, "I don't get it." I'm like, "Oh my God." Right. But it's not for me. So I went on after him actually. A funny thing was I remember I went to the Bearcat. For some reason I didn't play the Bearcat for like 12 years.
yeah.
First time I went back, Tim was on before me, smashing it because he's brilliant. And I was like, the reason I haven't been here for 12 years is because they put me on after Tim fucking Vine. Well, all right, here we go. So I went to the beach the other day. It was covered in sand and I said it and he got a massive laugh. And I was like, "You see, Tim, fuck off." But,
That's
but
brilliant.
Sarah literally finishes a tour,
Yeah.
treats herself to a holiday in New York, and then the next one starts almost immediately. And I'm kind of I huge admiration for her as a comedian, but
Oh,
also
she's
her
wonderful.
work ethic. I think, and then I think there's a lot of some of the bigger names who I don't think their process is quite as what's the word as
Methodical.
methodical, structured, disciplined, or even anywhere near as good as that. There's a fair few people who can sell tickets who don't,
Yeah, yeah.
I think, put in the effort. There's some I haven't watched their stuff because I know what it's going to be like, and I'm not going to name names, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think I don't know if I have a process. I found it very interesting doing a tour
Mm,
because often in the past with my Edinburgh shows, I've written quite I've previewed a lot, and there's been a lot of kind of juggling stuff around and seeing what goes where, and it's always it's a really good way of writing is to just go over what you've written because you think, oh, actually, I didn't think of that. That could go that way. Um, so I previewed and previewed and previewed, and then you get to Edinburgh and you're like, oh, it's still not there, but you give it a couple of days. My last Edinburgh show, I sort of specifically went up with a kind of I feel I'm in the form of my life in the clubs. I'm just going to go up there and do an hour's club set, and that's what it's going to be. And really weird. I only did two previews, and they weren't even previews; they were like extended sets. And weirdly, I went up, and literally within about 3 days, it had got into the most sort of tightly structured show with callbacks and stuff that you always have in an Edinburgh show. And I don't know if that's because I'm a very experienced comedian now, but it was weirdly, without trying, it became the most structured show I've ever written. I think it was probably the best straight stand-up show
That's
I've ever
amazing.
written. But when I took it on the road, it changes because I'm not of a level where I can book out a massive theatre and blah blah blah. So it's sometimes some places I was like doing an hour. Maybe there'd be the first half, I'd be the second half. Some places I was doing an hour and a half. And also I'm a topical comic, so there's always stuff happening. But because it was so tightly structured by accident, I found it quite constricting as the tour went on because I had a show. Whereas when I'm doing club stuff, if I want to suddenly start talking about,
Yeah.
I don't know, Jacob Rees-Mogg saying the National Trust dislikes Britain, which he said yesterday, and I want to just go off on that tangent, I can. Whereas I actually, weirdly, being given my own space on tour, I found more constricting. So the next tour, I'm going to try and leave it a bit more open. But as a result of which, sorry, it's a very convoluted answer, but it's
No,
genuinely
please.
something I've been thinking about a lot recently.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really write much while I was on tour. I mean, I wrote a bit, I updated a bit about Suella Braverman. There was some stuff about Rwanda and David Cameron coming back, which became useful when I was doing longer shows because I would start with that. I did a solo show two solo shows in Hartford where I lived with the support, and I did that before I brought the support on, so then I could do the show. But I didn't feel I was writing. I worked. I mean, the last couple of months of last year, I probably one of the hardest I've ever worked because I did the tour around club dates because I didn't know how it was going to work financially, and I was very pleased. So January, I was like, right, January, I'm going to do fuck all. Obviously, apart from a Rich Comic Live podcast.
Of course.
No, I've done a lot less gigs this month. I've
Yeah.
done a lot of DIY. I've done stuff with my kids. I've been and I've really enjoyed it. There's this little nag all the time going, should be doing more gigs, should be doing more gigs, because we all have that all the time. That whole, you go to the cafe and something funny happens and you think, oh, that could work. And you also
I get that just watching you. I have a break where I don't go and then I miss it and I have to go back again. There's something about it that is fascinating. Why you keep going? Because as I said at the start, it's such a joyous thing to be part of, and I think that makes it sounds wanky, but it makes you as a character. You find something that you're so passionate about, and you're away.
Yeah. I think there's that, but I also think this. I mean, on a very simple sort of chemical level, we all love the fucking dopamine, the hit of being on stage. Every single comedian has found out the last couple of years they've got ADHD because it's just you and people are like, oh my God, have you got? No, actually, they all have because it's literally what makes a good comic is all the things that are the symptoms of ADHD. My wife said this to me, which just kind of it was a bit of a kind of Damascene moment. She went, you just, because your brain doesn't quite give you dopamines and endorphins like normal people's does, whereas standing in front of a crowd does that. She said, you have spent 20 plus years working your arse off. You're any other profession, you'd be a fucking director of a company by now. You'd be, as it is, you travel all over the world for shit. You're treated like shit. Your ego gets stamped down. People don't respect you, blah, 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 blah. You'll drive for 2.5 hours to go and play to 20 people for not enough money, all for some fucking chemical hit. And I was kind of like, that's about right. So basically, we're all drug addicts is the problem.
That's a good title for a book.
Yeah.
Chemical hit.
A chemical hit, yes. But I think, but so when you don't perform as much, and it's quite interesting, like the last couple few weeks, I've just done Friday and Saturdays.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but there is also a bit of you going, oh, have I updated enough stuff?
yeah,
But I find in my the way I write, stuff kind of shuffles out of my set by sort of by itself. And I mean, I might mention Liz Truss now, but I'll mention it in a very different way to how I mentioned it last year when it was still current or at least recent.
yeah,
But as I said, one of the reasons I didn't carry the tour on into this year is that, talking about Liz Truss in November 22 in 2023 was fine. In 2024, this
mm,
seems a little bit, and I wanted to move on. I want to write new, but I really haven't written. I've written like two new jokes this year, and I'm now going, and obviously I'm now going, I may never write another joke again. I have finished it. It's over.
well, I hope you
But no,
do.
from next month I'll be back out. And so my writing process really is mostly notes that I just like on my phone, things
Yeah,
I notice, and then on stage, I realize more and more how much it is on stage, and also it never stops. I mean, you get routines that you've had in there for a long time, and then
yeah,
suddenly you think of a new way of doing them. And I mean, and then you rediscover routines, and also people always say with topical comedy, oh, the problem is it disappears. But you
yeah.
know what? Really, Donald Trump, yeah, that disappeared. That basically round, you got all
God
your George
help him.
W. Bush jokes out again. Then you do them for Trump. Then you got Boris Johnson. You've got
Yeah,
Brexit. I mean, these things just keep on
yeah.
going around. So
It's it's interesting because if you look at somebody like Eric Morecambe, he was infamously always on.
yeah,
So he there must have been something that empowered him to forever make people laugh. And it's interesting
he
how
also struck me
yeah,
as quite a content man.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
There's a really good interview with him and Ern with I think it's with Parkinson, and
yeah,
he's there because he's smoking his pipe, which I always think
yeah,
is quite. And to be honest, it doesn't feel like he's on. He's quite witty a couple of
yeah,
times because he can be. I mean, I think the great example of that was deeply destructive was Peter Cook,
yeah,
because Peter Cook was on and was so funny, and almost I think it, I mean, I'm a huge fan. How can you not be?
yeah,
But like to the point that it was just so he had to drink and smoke and just be
yeah,
just to dull it
yeah,
slightly. And
yeah,
there is an element of that. I mean, funny enough, I mentioned Michael. Michael, I'm not saying Michael is deeply upset or unhappy or whatever, but Michael's always on. He's
yeah,
always, and
yeah, yeah,
I mean, one thing I find quite funny about Michael is he's a lot easier to get on with in dressing rooms now he's famous because he got what he wanted. Like when he was the very overconfident open spot, he put quite a lot of noses out of joint. Now he's the multi-millionaire star of Saturday Night. It's like that's Michael McIntyre, and I mean he's a great guy, but it is
he
a
is.
weird thing to be constantly. And but I think there's an element a lot of us are all on because we're always trying to be funny. We're always trying to quip at stuff. But yeah, it must be exhausting to have that constantly.
The nice thing about you, though, as an example of your act, and I've watched you for years. I've watched your act over the years, and every time I see you, you're very amiable on stage. So you're not just funny. You give the impression that you can say whatever you like because you get the audience in straight away, and that's a massive quality to have.
I
And
think
I think that helps enormously.
I think yeah. Funnily enough, I watched my last special a little while ago, and I went, God, I was angry that year. And it was a bit more ranty than I'd remembered. I am quite well known for rants, but you have to have people on side in order to do the rants.
Yeah,
And I'm a big believer in, I'm obviously more of the left than the right.
yeah,
I'm a Remainer,
yeah.
all those sort of things. I think Trump is a literally, a threat to humanity, an
Too right.
existential threat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think conservative, blah, 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 blah,
Yeah,
blah. You can't sort of preach at people. If you are going, I think this, that's fine, but you're a
yeah,
fucking comedian.
yeah,
And I mean, a very good friend of mine who's a great comic was sort of so he's put this odd post up going to any woke comedians or any something like that, and it was just like if you're a woke comedian, then that's bollocks. I mean, I'm woke. I consider myself woke in that I consider woke to mean respect for your fellow human being.
Yeah.
But if my purpose is preaching, it, no, I don't. I mean, without well, possibly pushing it slightly, but I mean, I genuinely think you could have a Nazi comedian as long as he's won you over if the jokes are good. And
That's
it's
true.
being a Nazi, it's quite difficult to win people over, especially at the moment. But I think I'm quite proud that I have had quite a lot of people come to my shows, especially in the last few years, say, I voted to leave, but I loved your show. Because I think I don't think you can object to most of what I say
Yeah.
because I tend to make sure my stuff is thought through and well argued. Because if
Yeah.
it's not, I can't defend it. And then if you can't defend it, you shouldn't say it. And you get the odd one. I mean, I was at Bath Comedia a while ago, and someone said there was because when Johnson was still Prime Minister, and I think it's to this nation's absolute shame that it elected that charlatan,
Yeah.
or didn't elect him. He was foisted upon us, but then did elect him. And I was basically slagging him. Apparently, there was just a bloke in the balcony, just with a finger, just going because he didn't have any. Because you couldn't dispute what I was saying that
Yeah.
he was a charlatan, a liar, a
Yeah.
fraud. So that's all they've got. And then quite recently, I was doing Plymouth Argyle Football Club. It's a lovely gig down there in Plymouth. It's a long way to go, but I was in the West Country, so I went and did it. And it was in the sort of function room of the football club, and it was quite a sort of mid-late. It's also Devon, they're quite Brexity and stuff down there, and it was a kind of you walked in and went, this has got a kind of conservative with a small C vibe, and I did, and I like you say, I like to think I'm amiable. I like to think I'm charming enough that they will go with what I say.
Yeah.
And I had a really, really lovely gig. And then I was on first, so I could get home. And I got there was an Instagram post from Chris Brooker, who's the MC. It's going, great night at Plymouth Argyle. Hats off to the audience member who left in the second interval because of the hard left opener. Now, I wouldn't for a moment consider myself hard left,
No.
but I love the fact that he walked out not because of me immediately. He waited for the interval after me and the middle act, and then decided it was time to make a stand.
That's brilliant.
But I think it comes down to what I've had a couple of pile-ons over the years from like Lawrence Fox, or Andrew Neil was another one. And Andrew Neil's one was actually quite amiable and I didn't mind, but you forget what it's like when someone has a go at you in front of 4 million people, because then people just come flying out of the woodwork, and there's so many comedian, never heard of you, and I've always gone, look, your ignorance is not really my problem. There's no reason you should have heard of me. And we all get it, comedian allegedly. I mean, that's what it says on my Twitter biography, comedian allegedly.
Yeah.
Because I'm preempting it, and I always get people going, good job you say allegedly, and I'm like, right, you've just used my joke, you fucking idiot. That's the point of it. So you just used the joke of a comedian you profess to dislike. And there was one bloke in particular who said something just, I've seen you, and I've seen your comedy and it's shit. And bless her heart, I was a fan of mine up in the fan up in Colchester way, and she actually went on to defend me online, which was very sweet of her and completely unnecessary because it didn't bother me. She went, he's actually not shit. He's very, very good. I've seen him a number of times and never not thought he was brilliant. Just go online and have a look at his Australia routine. It's fantastic. There's a routine I had about dangerous animals in Australia, which was one of those ones that wrote itself from traveling and became the closing joke of the set, the closing routine for quite a while, because it was a really sort of storming bit of stand-up. And he wrote back and went, actually, I've seen it, and I'm sorry, I didn't find it funny. But I suppose you're right. It's just down to individual taste, isn't it? And I really wanted to leap in, but then I thought, no, because he'll know I'm reading it. I really wanted to leap in and go, mate, I really don't care if you think I'm funny or not. That's entirely up to you. I am a comedian. That's not something you can dispute, because that's how I make my living and have done for 20 years. But the point is, that routine you're talking about is not shit. I know it's not shit because it's never failed in front of hundreds and thousands of people. Yeah. But you decided you hated me because Andrew Neil had a go at me.
Yeah.
And then you angrily looked for me online and you angrily clicked on something. And I appeared going, God, I went to Australia last. Oh, well, this is shit. you never, and there's, I can't remember who it is, someone very much wiser than me, but a, who was it who said if they, yeah, if they don't like you, they are not going to laugh. And
Yeah,
it's really important to remember that.
yeah. It's because I've seen so many. As I said earlier, if you walk on and you're very warm and very engaging with a crowd, then you've got this, or you would think you've got this likability, and then of course you have to say your first line and hope that gets an absolute laugh, and then you're
But
away.
and I think that there is also something to be said for the other side of it, which I admire so much more, is
Yeah,
those people who are prepared not to be liked,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
people who are prepared to not do well in order
yeah,
to sort of. And you watch, I mean, there's a lot of people like Izzard,
yeah,
Harry Hill, Vic Reeves, who would die fucking horribly, and
yeah,
they were kind of learning how to. And I have huge, because I've always been quite amiable, I think. And I've always been, I mean, there's something about the way an experienced stand-up walks on stage, which is, I think natural public speakers have it anyway. But something about a comedian, they had a couple of times where they put comedians on at the Gong Show who would like, who just go, oh, can I have a go? And it didn't work because as soon
yeah,
as they walked on, the audience kind of went, oh, right, they know what they're talking about.
yeah,
And it is
yeah,
a kind of, there's an innate confidence to that. But I've seen it, I mean, there was one particular guy who never really progressed much beyond, opening 20s because he had a couple of, but he used to walk out and again, I'm not going to name names, but he would used to walk out and sort of basically give the audience the finger and tell them to fuck off. And I was always like, that's a really interesting opening. If you can start like that and get them back, and then he'd proceed to do a 20 that was kind of really didn't need that at the start.
yeah, yeah,
And because he'd done that, it was immediately just really difficult to do.
yeah, yeah,
Um, Having said that, I always remember watching Matt Holtness, who's
yeah,
Garth Marenghi, Up the Creek came out just sort of telling the audience off that he was a magician who was going to do something with this key, and because the audience weren't going with it, he went, "I know you've been primed by my nemesis," and he ended up bollocking the audience. It was about 15 minutes, and it was fucking brilliant because no one knew what was going on, and then they kind of went with it, and the angrier he got, the better. And he stormed off, having done. And Malcolm
that's
Hardy
so
was still
good.
alive. Malcolm Hardy was still alive because Malcolm
Oh,
walked up and just
brilliant.
went, "Oh, that was fucking brilliant, wasn't he? Came on, did fuck all. You fucking loved him anyway." And I think that yeah, the sort
I
of
love that. I
being
love the left field comedians, and of course Harry Hill comes to mind. I first saw Harry Hill at the King's Head 30 odd years ago, and he brushed past me, jumped up on the stage, and to this day he has the greatest opening line ever for a gig. And he stood on stage. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to have a testicle brought down." And there was a pause, and then he said, "From Derby." And And
he
when I met him 25 years later, he went, "Oh, Rich, I still use that."
it's a great line, isn't it? But he
It's
he
just off
also
field. It's
oh
brilliant.
he's funnily enough when I started I didn't like him. I was
Yeah,
like because I hadn't seen him live. I'd seen bits and I was just like this is just silly, isn't it? And then uh I think it was the opening night of the Backyard Club. So this is about 99 or something. I think I
yeah.
just started and I saw him live for the first time and just came away going, "Oh, right. I'm a fucking idiot."
what
He's and
I
he
what
and he's
I
a lovely, lovely
oh,
man,
he's
but
a
he's
lovely bloke.
such a great comic.
What I love about him is that he is happy to play any club now because he's done the TV. He's a bit like
Oh yeah.
McIntyre, where you said earlier on, he still does the warm ups and he's free to go wherever he wants. Harry Hill is the same. He's always on the circuit these days,
I
going
I worked
around.
with him at Top Secret
Yeah,
a few weeks ago.
yeah, 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 and that's wonderful because it's not just I want to get to the TV level. I want to be a comedian wherever I play, and I think that's wonderful. And I think from what we was talking about before, it all boils down to the love of doing it. You
Yeah, and I think
yeah,
it's quite funny with uh like Harry when we did Top Secret because Top Secret's obviously got the downstairs room and the
yeah,
upstairs room,
yeah,
and he uh he basically died in his arse downstairs and came up going, God, I fucking died on my arse down there. And then I saw him upstairs and he did great. And he got someone up on stage for a kind of wrestling match, which I was kind of amazed because it's almost like rule 101 of almost every comedian in the book is never get someone out of the audience because it's going to be some pain in the ass going, oh, I could do this, or it could be anyone who wants to be on stage shouldn't be there. Anyone who doesn't, you oh no. And he got them up and started wrestling with them. And I said to him, I went, that was weird that you did that because not only would it be weird if anyone did it, but there's a bloke now going, I had a wrestling match with Harry Hill.
Yeah, yeah.
But I love the fact that he was just very much like, oh, because you don't remember what it's like to be gig fit. Actually, funny enough, it's quite now become quite a well-known story because of it. It was with McIntyre again. I was emceeing the store. This is a few years back, but Michael was fucking enormous by then, and so they were very excited. And he was trying out new stuff, and like most people, when you try out new stuff, after about a couple of minutes you veer into something is going to work because all of our egos do not want to die. Especially at the Comedy Store on a Saturday night. Okay, you may have a new bit, that's probably not the place to try it, even if you are one of the biggest comedians in the world. But he did, and then he did this routine I remember about revolving doors, and I remember watching this routine just going, there is nothing more to say on revolving doors. And it was such good stand-up. It was brilliant observational stand-up.
Yeah.
Anyone who thinks he's not a good comic is a fucking idiot.
No. I first
observational comedy of the highest order. Literally everything you've ever thought about revolving doors, rearranged comedically. It was genius. Anyway, and then he goes, right, and this was where you knew he wasn't gig fit.
Yeah.
He goes, right, well, I better go. And obviously, this is McIntyre at the store in front of 400 people going, no. And he went, oh, and they started going, more. And he did that terrible thing that can happen to anyone. Like, I like to think it could happen to anyone, but of kind of accidentally doing it. He engineered an encore, but it was clearly accidental. We've all seen people going, yeah, well, I've got to go now. Do you want, he was literally going, I've got to go now. So, and they wouldn't let him. And he went, oh God. And he went, oh, I don't know what to do now. And some bloke in the front row, literally that on the left of the Comedy Store, so about 1.5 meters away from him, just sat there, just went, how about some more bland observational shite? And Michael's face, he was furious because he's, it costs you 60 quid to get a shit ticket to see Michael these days. Some bloke sat 1.5 meters away from him said this. And I have to say, I was a bit like, what a cunt, because I mean, because Michael had just done something quite brilliant. But also, obviously, as a comedian, I was going, that is quite funny to see that. What you then saw was the gears whirring because Michael was not gig fit, but he went, but right, well, actually, maybe I will do. I'm sorry if my bland observational shot. Maybe just go home to the massive house, my bland observational shot. He sort of got it, and he got it back because he's very good. The funny thing was, I walked on stage after him, and normally, the act shakes your hand as they come off. He just walked straight past me. I went on and bollocked the bloke for being a twat. And said, fucking dare you? Just got one of the biggest comedians in the world, 1 meter away, and you can only be rude. Anyway, I walked back, and Michael had left already. And next time I said, he was really angry. And I can kind of understand it, but also there's something great about that. That someone.
Well, it's the live thing.
There's something great about someone being in a position where that can happen to them. Do you know what I mean? I don't think Michael likes it as much as someone like Harry would revel in it. And also, again, we come back to what I said earlier. Someone like Harry, who has died a lot. Michael has not died a lot because he's always been very good off the cuff. He's always been good, and then he suddenly took this leap to superb. And I often regret that I am not more experimental. I don't take more chances. But my ego can't cope with someone on the front row going, do some more bland observational shots.
But that leads on to the question I want to ask you, which is the other thing I find with you is your confidence is amazing when you're on a stage. So have you any, do you suffer from any nerves? Have you had any nerves in the past? How do you cope with nerves?
I don't. It's never been something that's bothered me.
Right.
I think the thing is, there are quite a few comics who get nervous.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a few, throw up every time they go on stage, and I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
Christ, can you imagine if you have to throw up every time you went to work? That would be.
Depends what you did.
But I also think there's something very simple about it, which is the amount of people, and every comic will tell you this, the amount of people who come up to you and go, I couldn't do what you do. Oh, balls of steel, fuck. And you're always like, because just so many people, the very act of speaking in public is terrifying.
Yeah.
And to comedians, generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, it just isn't. They don't have a fear of doing it. Some do, but I have never. I mean, I've had a couple. There's time, So I don't want to compare myself to a Viking too much, but there's a great bit in Eric the Viking, is it, where the bloke is there going, got this feeling, it's weird feeling in my tummy. It's like, yeah. And one of the other characters goes, "It's fear, it's fit." Oh, that's what it feels like. Yes. And you feel like this all the time? Bloody hell. And I think I mean, I know, find myself pacing up and down. I am quite a pacer. Most comics are. And when you're going out in front of, when you're being judged, which you're being judged every time, and I think every time you should always give your best shot, because you never know who's in the audience. But I have never been someone who's been bothered by nerves. The only time you get nerves really are when you're on stage and it's going very badly, and then everything just goes out of whack, and beads of sweat appear, and your heart rate goes up, and nothing. It's like walking through treacle. But luckily, partly one of the reasons I've always been a safe pair of hands is I don't like that feeling.
Yeah.
But nerves are. There's a little. I mean, if there's a lot riding on something, if you've got someone important watching, is this TV producer in or whatever. But again, I almost think that, I mean, I had this Edinburgh this year because I had a really good Edinburgh. And then the last day I was there, I mean, it had gone really well. The reviews couldn't have been nicer. The audiences had been great. The last day, my flyer cried off on, like, with no notice whatsoever. And suddenly, for the last show, I'd sold like a third of the tickets. So I basically tweeted and texted everyone famous I knew, going, could you give me a bit of a push today, because this has happened and it's my last show and I really want it to go well. And bless them, quite a lot of them did. One of whom was James O'Brien, the radio host, who's a good man.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you've got to get, if you're in Edinburgh, get to." And I literally had people walking in, kind of going, "James has sent us." And I thought, and I walked on, and literally the first gag got 30% of what it got at almost every other show. And I went, and I had two big reviewers in as well, and I knew that. And I went, "Oh, fuck." And then I went, and this is experience more than anything else, I went, this show, in my little on stage editor in my head, went, this show is probably the best show you've ever done. Just trust the show and do. And it was not as good a show as some of the others, because the audience were not as excited to be there or whatever. But it was still I still got 2 4-star reviews, because I trusted the show. And I think that's your only option, really. Because it's always that dynamic is really interesting, because I mean, I did 2 shows, home shows at Hertford, where I live.
Yeah.
And the first one sold out in 5 days. And the second one sold out. We put a second one on, and the second one sold out, relatively quick, but it took a lot longer to sell out. And when I did it, the first show was absolutely great. The second show, because like I said earlier, did a bit, then put a support on, I did my bit, and it just was not going as well as it had the night before. And I was like, because what I had there were all these people who were going, so apparently this is sold out. And ask any comic who's had a 5-star review in Edinburgh, the audience the next day is always the worst audience, because it's full of people going, well, apparently we're meant to be. And it comes back to what I was saying about not liking you, going, well, here's Mr. Big Potatoes. You're not, I didn't write the fucking review. And so funnily enough, but the second night was really good because I did the opening bit and it was like, oh, you're a bit harder work. Right. Okay. Put the support on. But I kind of knew as a result how to do it. So they made me work harder on the second night, but I think it was probably a better show as a result. So it
Yeah,
can go anyway. But yeah, bottom line is if you're nervous, trust the show. And if
yeah,
you're dying on your ass, it happens sometimes. We all have to deal with it. And quite often, in fact, I would say in the vast majority of cases, if you die on your ass, it's probably, this sounds terribly arrogant, at this stage in your career, not really your fault.
no,
Probably someone has got a shit microphone or
yeah,
has told the waiting staff at the corporate not to serve a meal in the middle of, stuff like that. So yeah, I would say nerves. I'm not saying I don't get them at all, but it's never been something that bothers me.
no. That's fascinating. And with all your experience over the years, who makes you laugh? Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Did you have comedy growing up?
Yeah, Dave Allen was a big one for me.
Oh mate, he was
Dave
fantastic.
Allen, anyone who the Beatles had difficulty following, it's got to be pretty fucking good. I
Yeah,
always quote it's funny enough, I was listening to Aid Edmondson's Desert Island Discs the other day, and I read his book, by the way.
yeah, I've got it to
Brilliant.
read.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
yeah, yeah,
Um and yeah, Flanders and Swan and Tom Lehrer. My dad had the records, and
yeah,
so I
yeah.
listened to those
Really good.
over and over again. And so I still think they were quite important.
Yeah,
Um, But I also think I sort of think back to what I like the two Ronnies were quite, that was we watched a lot of two Ronnies. Jasper Carrot, probably. Like the young ones came along when I was at school and I couldn't watch it.
yeah,
So I'd hear that this was amazing, sort of anarchic thing. And the thing is, there's quite a lot of stuff about the young ones and stuff, the sort of the anarchic that I'm a bit more I kind of like stuff a bit cleverer. For
yeah.
want of a better word. Now, I'm not saying Rick Mail, love him, but I always felt like Flash Art in Blackadder was slightly the wrong tone, and I'm sure Rick Mail would take that as a compliment. But Blackadder is my favorite
It's
sitcom
superb.
of all time
Yeah,
by a country mile. I could argue for hours about whether Percy is a funnier character than Lieutenant George or the Prince Regent, and the answer is he is. But Percy's the best character in the history of comedy.
yeah,
But I mean, I honestly I could argue for hours with myself about my favorite series. And so when Rick Mail turned up being all flash heart, I'm a bit like, go back to the young ones. Not that I don't think the young ones is brilliant, and not that there wasn't amazing. I mean, I did like Ben Elton very much, which might be because of where I ended up as a more topical comic. Um, but I've all and Eddie Izzard as I was becoming. I guess he started becoming big like towards my end of my teens. And I
yeah,
actually,
yeah.
when I started comedy, I had to stop watching Eddie Izzard because, as you can probably hear from my voice, I've got a slight tendency to, fish. And like every generation of comics has a comic that everyone sounds like. Then my generation, everyone tried to be Eddie Izzard. Then you had this generation trying to be Ross Noble.
Yeah,
Then you had people trying to be Daniel Kitson. A lot
yeah.
of sort of improvised. Basically, these guys who make it look like they're just making it up on the spot when a lot of the time they really aren't. And that's what. And then Stuart Lee has got so much to answer for.
Oh,
The amount of fucking. I mean, I love Stuart. It's just absolutely
yeah.
wonderful comedian. But the amount of people who think that it's like watching Pinter without any of the, just if I leave a pause here and then
His
comment.
books are good as well.
I've read quite a few of those, but
Yeah,
Stuart's a very funny bloke personally as well.
yeah,
But he has created a kind of whole. I mean, a friend of mine. I've told this story before, but she was a great comic on her day, and she would be. She doesn't do it anymore, and but she could be really good, and I saw her smash it. I mean, but she wasn't that consistent, so she was never getting quite the bookings she felt she deserved. And to be fair, that I think her talent deserved, and so she was having to speak to people kind of a bit lower down the pecking order as she saw it, and they weren't sure if they were going to give her a gig, and it's like. I've been doing this for a few years and I've actually done this and I've done that. So and she said this beautiful thing. She said, I sometimes get the feeling they're looking at each other going, she's not even trying to be Stuart Lee. And I think that's a very,
That's
very
lovely.
there are there are good examples of that. And again, it's that. I mean, I did. Do you ever see the show Joke Thieves?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I did that in Edinburgh a few times, and because you do it, you take the piss mercilessly.
yeah,
You have to do it with affection.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
I did. I mean, I remember doing it with Mike Newell, who's a great comic from up
yeah,
north, and he
yeah.
was like, I'm gonna do you as a bit of a posh twat. Is that all right?" And I was like, "Mate, I'm gonna do you as Northern Scum. I think that we're gonna be fine." And it was great because there was genuinely it was funny, and there's genuine respect and warmth and
Yeah.
and humor there. I did it in and I'd never seen this bloke before or since in King's Head, and he did his version of me. I know I'm high status. I know I can appear overconfident and arrogant, but his version of me was so sneeringly arrogant that it was just
No.
like it was just. But yeah, but I've seen people do that brilliantly, right? But he did it. It was just quite rude,
Yeah.
and a bit of me went because he also wasn't really, you know, hesitate to say, but he wasn't quite the level of comedian to be that fucking rude. And then he did his bit, but his bit was a lot of pauses and quite a few gags that I was aware of their providence and they weren't his. So I was fucking merciless when I went on. I went, I'm just going to pause for no apparent reason for far too long because I've seen a Stuart Lee video. And then I'm going to do a Tim Vine joke. And it was just, because I mean, we all have influences and you've got constant influences. And so many of the comics I love are people I work with all the time. Roger Monkhouse. I did a
Oh, I
gig with
love
Tom
him.
Ward the
Yeah.
other day and he was
Yeah, yeah.
just so lovely to watch.
Yeah.
I just
So
think,
many.
yeah.
The very first comedian I ever saw in 1974 was Les Dawson on a
Oh,
family
yeah. I
holiday
remember
in
you've
Scarborough.
told me that you'd seen him live.
And
And
that was amazing. And then a year later, we saw Tommy Cooper. And
wow.
that was just incredible. The curtains open, there's a little bed that he's lying on, and there's one woman in the crowd pissing herself, and it trickles round so everybody's laughing, and he hasn't done a thing. With perfect timing, he pops his head up. He went, "What? What? Has somebody come on?" Absolute
Those are
genius.
two people who,
Oh,
well, I mean, like I say about the
yeah. I got the book.
posing. I mean, this is what I thought was fascinating about Aid Edmondson's book, sort of the history
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
comic strip and everything, because it is, they created the circuit that I've been able to make a
yeah,
living.
yeah.
Um, and I owe them everything in many ways, and I'm a huge fan of a lot of that generation.
Mm.
But I'm sure, as he says in the book, and there's a lot of them would say they didn't see themselves as a new. Anyone will take a label. If someone says you are a new movement and you are going to
Yeah.
here's £100,000, of course you're going to
Not
say
going to
take it.
happen at the time.
But the vast majority of comedians will just they like comedy. If you meet a comedian who doesn't like Les Dawson and Tommy Cooper, what's going on? They were always
Well, they
brilliant. They
gave
were on a
me the
different
bug.
circuit,
They
but
really did.
then I mean, and I do think there's an element that it wasn't comedians, it was society going, yeah, you've got to stop being racist, you've got to
Yeah,
stop
yeah,
being
yeah,
sexist, you've got to stop.
yeah,
Now you can make jokes about race, you can make jokes about different, gender equality, gender gap, blah 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 blah. You make jokes about anything, but the intention. I'm funny enough. I was talking to someone in Hartford about a school governor who had sort of in a in a school governors meeting had basically made a racist joke, and you kind of go, "What? It's not accepted." Someone else had because
You
it's
can't
not
say
okay. And I
that.
mean, I think we all see it now in like WhatsApp groups. I had to leave a
Yeah,
WhatsApp group because someone posted something comparing homosexuality to child abuse, and like the WhatsApp group is now like the kind of where people show their true colors, and you go, I don't. This is meant to be a tennis club. Fuck
yeah,
off.
yeah.
Um,
Yes.
but I think in terms of comedy, Dave Allen quite happily was
Yeah,
genius
yeah, yeah,
at the same time as Bernard Manning was going, how many packies does it take to was out? And
yeah.
you go, even now I say that word and I go, God, should I have said that word on a public podcast? Because you probably shouldn't. Luckily, I did it in Bernard Manning's accent, so everyone's going to, or you can bleep it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, but the thing is, Dave Allen was there just very wanly, and you watch him still,
Oh, he's brilliant.
just
He's
that
absolutely brilliant.
it's just the brilliance of a raised eyebrow
Yeah,
that go,
yeah.
and you know, it's
I had a chance to see him, and I was ill, I had a chance to go and see him at the Strand Theatre, and I wish I'd gone. I did see Rick Mail, and I saw the two Ronnies, and they were amazing. I was in the audience for the last sketchbook, and I mean, I've just seen so many over the years, and the start of the Comedy Store and all the rest of it. It's just amazing.
I do
Um,
think the
I
two
could
Ronnie.
I
Oh,
could genuinely talk to you all night. I've much enjoyed this. You've been a fantastic guest.
thank you. It's
Um,
been a pleasure to
just
talk to you, Rich.
just before we go, have you got anything else you'd like to say? Where people can find you on social media? Have you got any podcasts, anything like that?
I
Anything I should
don't have a
know?
podcast. I should have. I feel like I'm desperately lacking in that department. I had one that was quite successful with James O'Brien, and then we stopped doing it. And then we kind of went,
Really?
that could have gone really well. And James became huge. Would probably be living the life of the have a word pod guys these days. But no, I don't have a podcast. So I'll keep on thinking about doing one. I am basically, I did a big push at the end of last year. Social media has changed everything, really, and I don't know it's all for the good, but I am on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all those things as Alistair Barrie.
Yeah.
I did Stuart Goldsmith's Comedian podcast, and he thought I was the first comic they'd found who'd actually managed to get his own name on everything. So I'm not Alistair Barrie 01 or Alistair_Barrie. But so I've not put anything out for a month because this kind of constant need to put stuff out means there's an enormous amount of shit out there.
Yeah.
And it's very funny the amount of gigs you go to now where, in some cases there are more tripods than jokes. And I
That's a great line.
I've just thought of that, and as I thought of it, I thought
You could use that.
but I so I do put stand up out, but I do put up stand up that generally speaking that I think passes the test. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, that's normally where it goes. TikTok less so, but I still put it up there. Facebook, and then I will be ramping things up probably to in fact I've just remembered I was meant to phone someone about this year's Edinburgh and I've forgotten. I'm probably going to try and do the same thing again this year, do Edinburgh and then tour in the autumn. And so if you follow me on socials, I will bother you more and more as the year progresses, I imagine.
Well, I am definitely coming to see you soon because you're genuinely one of my favourite comedians. You
Ah,
always
bless you,
make me
Rich.
laugh, and I like everybody and everything, but you always stand out. I said to you at the top, whenever you're on a bill, I know I'm going to have a good time, and you always
Yeah,
do.
but I bet you're going to say that to the 144th.
No, 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 I don't. No. Anyway,
Rich, has
my
been my
friend,
absolute pleasure,
all the very
and
best to
I'll see
you.
you next time in the front
Thank
row
you
with
so
that
much.
famous laugh.
Exactly. All right, my friend. You take care. Thank
All the best,
you.
mate.